Good evening. Once again, we're brought together here for an opportunity to discuss the direction that this nation is moving towards. My name is Mark. I'm from Michigan. And we'll be covering all aspects, or everything that we possibly can, concerning the New World Order operations inside the United States. We'll be discussing the MJTF Police, FinCEN, United Nations Combat Forces inside the United States, and the conversion of the United States into an asset for the United Nations. To begin with, I originally worked as an intelligence analyst in 1975 through to 1981, first with USAIX, Company D out of USAIX, Fort Huachuca, Arizona. From there, moved on to 5th U.S. Army Intelligence Center, where I worked both as an intelligence analyst and as a counterintelligence coordinator. Later, through the 80s, up until present time, I command two both 2nd and 3rd OPFOR brigades, which are special warfare units that train U.S. military forces in foreign warfare and tactics. We're going to start out with the MJTF Police and where it came from, what its original mission was, what its mission is now. Through a series of political actions that started around approximately March of 1989, the federal government extorted resources from most of the states, in fact all 50 states simultaneously, within a 2-week period, passing laws in every state authorizing the use of federal funding to convert local and state forces into national police forces. The MJTF Police Multi-Jurisdictional Task Force is in virtually every state of the Union of the United States at this time. Its primary mission is house-to-house search and seizure, separation and categorization of men, women, and children in large numbers, the transfer to detention facilities, and the use of those facilities for interrogation purposes. The MJTF are regular National Guard, local law enforcement, and street gangs converted to National Police Services. Remember that this was originally organized under George Herbert Walker Bush. We all know, of course, now that President Clinton has proposed a national police force. This is simply another name, in fact, an overt name, for the MJTF Police. Now, the motto for the MJTF Police is that they are the velvet glove on the iron fist. Anybody who's familiar with some of the speeches that have taken place, ex-President Reagan spoke in England here approximately 2 months ago and commented that the United Nations forces would be the velvet glove on the steel fist. This is a very popular phrase. It has been used extensively by these people that are within the New World Order operation. I don't know how you feel about this, but anytime I've been hit with an iron fist, I usually don't feel too good, and a velvet glove doesn't make much difference. It should be noted that most of the resources are being drawn from, again, federal fundings to our regional governments. The state of Michigan converted part of their forces over on February 11th of 1989 when Senator Carl Levin, the state adjutant generals of the state of Michigan, Ohio, and Indiana met in Lansing. And at 6:35 in the evening, an agreement was struck in which elements of the Michigan National Guard would be deployed in Indiana and Ohio in the event of, and in fact it was stated that when firearms are confiscated in the Midwest, that these forces would be deployed both in Indiana and in Ohio. Indiana and Ohio would then provide 50% of its Guard forces to police the Michigan area under the MJTF police guidelines. Approximately 3 months after the arrangement was made, through the Department of Defense in conjunction with other agencies, some of them unknown at this time, the state of Indiana backed out of the agreement. When this took place, the federal government, through a series of funding coordinations, withdrew resources from the state of Indiana. They had to restructure part of their Guard mechanism, and in the process, were able to maintain a good portion of their original integrity concerning their preparedness strength for Guard forces. 3 battalions had to be restructured at that time. Now, the MJTF police are supplied and supported through strategic reserve aircraft that have been transferred to their resource. They will convert almost all of the existing local police agencies to national police forces after they've rifted personnel that they do not consider trustworthy. And they will also incorporate street gangs. Now, if anybody has seen the guidelines, and we have copies of both, the original stated that house-to-house search and seizures would be performed by military, law enforcement, and civilian personnel. Now, we all know who the military are. That's anybody in a green uniform or a blue uniform with the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, Coast Guard. We understand that those would be people in the National Guard, Reserve, and active military forces. We know who law enforcement is. These are the constables, the individuals that you have at your local level, all the way up to and including our secret police in the United States, such as the FBI, Central Intelligence Agency, and other agencies that might be at their disposal, Defense Intelligence Agency, etc. Who are the civilians that were going to come into your home? I don't recall there being any guidelines for that in the Constitution. If anybody has listened to National Public Radio, you will note that on several different occasions, specifically the 10th month of 1992, it was announced, and in fact there was a 1-hour special program on National Public Radio about converting the street gangs to law enforcement agencies. We had been talking about this for years prior to its action. We knew that there were preparatory activities taking place. But through these activities, a truce was signed by most of the large gangs in the city of Los Angeles. At the time, there were negotiations in process in Chicago, and this was also taking place in New York. Since the initial actions, a full agreement has been signed in Los Angeles, and both the Crips and the Bloods are now being trained, equipped, and uniformed with federal funding through California. Chicago has finalized this agreement last week. New York is in the process of doing so sometimes in the next few weeks, and we can assume that they will do this very quickly. These forces will be the cannon fodder, the Schützenhauptbefehl. Their mission is to be the forefront, the master forces to come through the door. Remember that the average federal agent makes anywhere from $47,000 to $57,000 a year. He's more or less looking at his pension. He's not concerned with risking his life, especially if he can find someone to throw in front of him as a sandbag. That's the mission of these group forces that are being organized. Since last I spoke, probably the best example, I'm sure that everybody listening here has heard about Waco, Texas. These forces that were on the ground, to give you the best example, were not effective fighting forces. When you retreat and leave wounded and dead lying on the ground, that's called a rout. That's not a retreat. And this is symptomatic of professional forces that are there for the money. On the other hand, if you use the old medieval pillage principle, and you have a profit mechanism set up in which you are allowed to confiscate properties, cars, jewelry, furniture, the neighbor's wife, whatever, then you're highly motivated to go through that door. And especially if you've been doing it illegally for an extensive period of time, and all of a sudden are given the opportunity to be legitimized. Remember, why let the street gang situation foster or flourish the way it did? We had more than the capability to restrict the street gangs at the time when they came about. Most assuredly, we had the capacity to restrict them in any way that we wish to. However, by allowing the street gangs to flourish, you create regimentation. Then, the strong come to the top. These are your NCOs and leaders. And when you are finished, you simply put them in uniform, and you have an organized military force at your disposal. They're thugs, but they're expendable thugs. Remember that.